So, we're thinking about buying our next watch from Kickstarter. Huh. What's up, guys? It's your boy Rich here, back at it again. And let's talk about crowdfunded watches, whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo, because it is a growing platform for watch enthusiasts. It's a haven for us because we are introduced to new watches routinely at some really exciting prices and offers. We are often incentivized with programs for being an early backer. In exchange, we are given a free watch or a free leather watch wallet or an early discount on the watches before they go on sale, or sometimes 2 watches for the price of 1, programs such as this. But if we're looking to find the next great watch for a couple of $100s, that needle in a haystack, because a lot of us are familiar with the legendary Rolex Submariner that went for about $300 in its early days, or if we're looking to get in on the ground floor for what is expected to be a really successful watch company, it's probably not going to happen. However, if we are excited and we want to support a watchmaker because we like his vision or his passion for a couple of $100s, then that's different because it's very low risk on both sides. The reality is most crowdfunded watches are not very good, and they often fail before they get started by not raising any money. We as watch enthusiasts are pretty savvy. So does that mean all crowdfunded watches are crap? No. So let's take a look at a few successful crowdfunded watches that have distinguished themselves with a good reputation and have separated themselves from the rest of the crowd. Pun intended. So let's talk about the first noteworthy crowdfunded watch, and that's Topatch. And if you're new around here, I also organize watch events, and during one of our last events, we included Mike Margolis, who is the president of Horology Works, which represents some lavish brands as H. Moser and Topatch. So I was able to handle these watches firsthand during our event, and it was a real joy. These are some magnificently made watches. These are truly exceptional masterpieces. You would never be able to tell that this is a crowdfunded watch, though it's not really a crowdfunded watch, and we'll talk about that more in a second. So, more about this watch. The Czech-born Polish watchmaker Francis Topatch was the original partner with Antoni de Patek before partnering with Adrian Philippe, which would give rise to the ever-prestigious brand Patek Philippe. And according to Topatch's website, together they formed a company called Patek Topatch &C on May 1st, 1839. But for some reason, Patek Philippe never registered the Topatch name. So on 2015, Topatch was officially revived through a crowdfunding campaign, though it has some real pedigree and history behind it. One of my favorite Topatchs is their Faubourg Krakow, and I might have mispronounced that name, so I am going to put it somewhere on the screen. It retails for $24,000. It is 41.5 millimeters and has 65 hours of power reserve. I really like the dial on this watch, as I do most Topatchs. And while this Topatch model is in the $20,000 plus range, I think they also have them in the $10,000 to $15,000 range as well. Topatch might be one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive watch in crowdfunding history. It deserves to rank up there with the giants, though it is made for a specific niche of watch enthusiasts. And while Topatch is officially a crowdfunded watch, it carries a real pedigree and history behind it that other crowdfunded watches can't boast, and that to me makes it extra special. Another noteworthy crowdfunding watch to mention is by Reservoir Watches. Reservoir Watches has taken on a different path than most other crowdfunded watches, and what I mean by that is they now sell their watches to retailers and have opened up their own boutiques, mainly in France, Germany, and Switzerland. Typically with a crowdfunded watch, they are born online and they live online. And part of the pitch is they don't have a middleman, and therefore they can pass the savings on to us. This is not the case with Reservoir watches, which might explain their somewhat more costlier prices than typical crowdfunded watches. The watch that I really like is their Tiefenmesser in bronze. It also comes in black and steel, and it retails for $4,000. It is a watch that is inspired by the submarine world, which is evident by the gauges on the dial. Reservoir Watches also uses a heavily modified ETA 2824 movement, and per their website, they have a 124-part proprietary module that is patented for its retrograde minute, jumping hours, and 37 hours of power reserve. I also noticed their nice presentation or packaging that comes with their watch. I think one of the challenges, or the biggest challenge that Reservoir is going to face, is their price tag for being a new crowd-funded watch. But if Topatch can make it, I hope their Reservoir watches can make it, and I hope their prices won't scare off consumers from an otherwise standout watch that came from the crowdfunding world. Another watch that I think is mentioning is by Swiss, specifically their RC1 SL. It's in 45 millimeters and it retails for $1,400, and they use an ETA 2824. I think this is a really good example of what an early pledging can do. And while this goes for $1,400, I think I remember seeing this for about $800 early on if you pledged early. So that is one of the incentives, a really good incentives for some of these crowdfunded watches. Next is Visitor Watch Company, and I like their Dunshore, and it retails for $650. It is 44 millimeters, and they use a Miyota 9015 movement. Miyota is owned by the Citizen Watch Group, and they also use some really exotic leathers for their straps. They use deerskin, ostrich, and calfskin, and they are very specific with their origins. When we get involved with a crowdfunded watch, we want to know everything about that watch, such as the type of steel that's used, their movement, the leathers, etc. And Visitor Watch Company is very specific on their website. So for example, they say they are designed in the USA, but they are manufactured in the USA, Hong Kong, and France. They are assembled in Hong Kong, and then they have quality controls in the USA and Hong Kong. And there is a whole list of origins where they are. And I like the fact that they don't hide anything. That makes them more trustworthy to me. And I really like a lot of the designs of the Visitor Watch Company. This is also a brand that has been around successfully as a crowdfunding watch. So one of the first things that we should look at before deciding just what kind of watch we should support is how many successful campaigns has that company had. And Visitor Watch Company have had many, which means they've gone through one campaign and people are willing to reinvest in a second lineup of watches, etc. And more than one campaign is obviously good. I think Visitor Watch Company has gone through several successful campaigns. So that is a trusting brand to get behind if we want to pledge and continue to support Visitor Watch Company. Another successful crowdfunding watch is Zelos by Elshan Tang. He's going on his third successful watch, the Abyss, and we can see here that they've been sold out. I like it in bronze. It's 43 millimeters, and he also uses the Miyota movement, and it's only about $820 with 300 meters of water resistant. Zelos started on Kickstarter in 2014. With their first introduction was the Helmsman, then the Chroma, and they averaged 300% of their targeted funding, with the Abyss at 650% of their funding goal received. And typically, most of his watches are under $1,000, and they are some solidly made watches. This is obviously a brand that people trust and like and continue to reinvest in. And finally, another popular and successful crowdfunding watch is Benares Watches, and I like their Moray dive watch in brass. It is 40 millimeters and it's only $349. It uses the Seiko NH35 movement. This is another popular brand, sub $1,000. An idea of a successful campaign comes from Benares. For example, they had a goal of $50,000 and they raised over $75,000, which is a really good sign for this trusting brand. Benares watches at these prices in brass. This is another good example of the kind of legitimate value that we can find as a crowdfunded watch. Are the ever-increasing crowdfunded watches here to stay, or is it a bubble? Well, I don't think it's necessarily a bubble. As long as the watches, like the ones we're covering today, continue to flood Kickstarter, then we're going to be okay. I mean, after all, we're looking for that next great watch that excites us that we haven't found out there. So we are open to that. We just also have to be aware that 99.9% of these watches are coming from the same source. So while the movements are reliable, and if that's not important to us because design and prices are, then I think we're going to be open to the next great exciting timepiece that really speaks to us. I think today's list is more of an exception to the rule for a legitimate crowdfunded watch. And while I receive my fair share of these types of watches to review, I just haven't felt strongly enough about them, enough to make a video on. But I wish those watchmakers well, and I hope that they can continue to improve on their craft. I also hope today's list is helpful as a guideline for when we want to noodle around for our next crowdfunded watch. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you the next time. So we want to get our next Red Bull So we want to get our next watch from Kickstarter. Kickstarter. I forgot.